The Ode to Joy appears like a burst of sunlight in the fourth movement of Beethoven's ninth and last symphony. His decision to bring soloists and a choir into an orchestral symphony was revolutionary, giving soaring voice to Friedrich Schiller's poem. It begins, Freude, schöner, Götterfunken, joy, beautiful spark of divinity. And like Pope Francis's recent encyclical Fratelli Tutti, sings the praises of fraternity and friendship. Though it draws upon pre-Christian allusions and post-Christian French revolutionary thought, the song finishes with the Christian call for all men and women to become brothers, embraced by the one loving Father in heaven. The ode also draws upon the very text from Isaiah used for the introit of Laetare Sunday, chanted for our entrance procession today. Rejoice with Jerusalem and be glad for her, all you who love her. Rejoice with her in joy and be suckled by her. Yet after the year we've had, it can seem almost tone-deaf to be singing an ode to joy or celebrating Rejoicing Sunday. In times like these, how can we read without irony the prophet's declaration, I exult with joy in the Lord, or the apostle's exhortation to be happy at all times? Well, before anyone accuses Isaiah of being a blind optimist, let's remember that all the dirges of the suffering servant used in Holy Week come from him. As for Paul, he readily catalogued his exhausting labours, many imprisonments and beatings, once with stones, 3 times with rods, and 5 times, he says, the 39 lashes. He suffered temporary blindness, snake bite, an enduring thorn in the flesh, shipwreck, and threats on every side. He reported often being sleepless, cold, starving, or anxious. Far from being a rosy-eyed romantic then, Paul often comes across more as a whinger. The paradox of biblical joy is that Paul, for all his hardships, always managed to give thanks for blessings received from God himself or for fruits of the Spirit demonstrated in the disciples. Indeed, it was Paul recorded the church's earliest hymns and doxologies, her first odes to joy. Paul was no simple optimist or pessimist, and no true Christian can be either. He was a realist, so supremely confident in God's grace that earthly challenges could not overcome him. That's how Christian joy works. Secondly, when our tradition speaks of joy, it doesn't mean fleeting physical pleasures or emotional highs. Contentment is found in doing what is good, or patiently enduring what is not. This kind of joy is consistent with unpleasant experiences and even feeling very low. Indeed, it's often experienced precisely in the face of these very things. By human virtue and divine grace, people get through. So Isaiah talks of bringing joy to the poor, broken-hearted, or imprisoned this morning. And we do that either by raising them out of those conditions or by helping them endure them in good spirit and transcend them. So too, Paul described joy as a fruit of the Spirit and said, "I am joyful amidst infirmities, reproaches, needs, persecutions, or distress, for Christ's sake. For when I am weak, then I am strong." A third aspect of Christian joy is that it comes not just as a feeling or even a graced disposition, but above all, in person. Jesus, the man of sorrows, joins us in the depth of our infirmities and grief, not as an uninterested observer, but as one of us, as vulnerable and hurt as we are. Not as a disinterested observer either, but as someone who is so thoroughly invested in us, he makes our happiness his own, our salvation his life's work. But he can only bring salvation because he is God, sharing in the infinite happiness of the Father. His coming amongst us is hailed as news of great joy. He rejoices in the Holy Spirit, and for the joy that was set before him, he endures the cross. Jesus compared himself with a bridegroom on his wedding day and had so much fun, his critics dismissed him as a party animal. Jesus was just too happy for their liking. Fourthly, if Jesus is joy, sharing his life is sharing in a deep spiritual happiness. "You have sorrow now, but I will see you again," he promised. "And when I do, your hearts will rejoice with a joy no one can take from you." Elsewhere, he says, "Rejoice in that day and leap for joy, for your reward is great in heaven." And again, "These things I have spoken to you, so that my joy may be in you, and your joy may be complete." Our Gaudete wisdom is that Jesus is precisely the shot in the arm we need, the ode we must sing in time of COVID. Not because he will instantly make everything nice, but because he enables us to face the harsh realities with confidence. Not because everything will always feel good, but because he will enable us to do those good things and endure those hard things that we must to be truly happy. To encounter him is to encounter supreme joy. As Paul told Timothy, ours is the glorious gospel of the happy God. Which brings me to our diocesan mission plan, Go Make Disciples, launched across the Archdiocese this weekend. After our extensive Parish 2020 consultations, research and discernment, our plan has at last crystallised and by a happy providence is being published just when our churches are reopening more fully and Catholics being called to come home to Mass. But to what kind of church are people being called? The church in Sydney is entering into a phase of renewal with the goal of being the best church we can be for these returnees and newcomers. So we start afresh with Christ's Great Commission to go and make disciples of all nations, baptizing them, teaching them, and remembering me to them. Ours must be a church then that evangelizes and forms, builds community and leads, and worships the happy God. Go Make Disciples invites each of us by God's grace to deepen our discipleship and calls every community of disciples to embrace the evangelizing mission of Jesus, reaching out to others, inviting them through word and deed to encounter the joy of the gospel. I invite you to have a look at our mission plan on our website and pray and reflect on the part you might play. In addition to my pastoral letter calling people home to Mass, we have a summary of the pastoral plan available at all the doors. The church in Sydney needs your gifts and generosity if we are to be the church we must be for God and each other in the 2020s and beyond. If we are to revitalise our mission, if we are to renew our parishes, we need your gifts and generosity. Then we shall hear those Gaudete words of Jesus, "Well done, good and faithful servant. Enter into the joy of your master."